Yo, what is up, everybody? It is Alex here, and today I actually wanted to talk to you a little about Jungian archetypes and what they mean and what they are and why you should understand them and how you should apply them into your lives and why they are very important for self-analysis and being self-aware. Okay, so what are Jungian archetypes? Jungian archetypes, and I'm really going to go over four today. Four of the main ones that Robert Moore took from Carl Jung's work and described as the primary domains of what entailed to be, kind of the epicenter of and the most important archetypes out of all of Carl Jung's work. And so we're going to talk about four today. And those four are the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. And basically what these archetypes are basically domains of being that you can use as symbology. And they are symbolic representations of who you are. So the only way that I can describe this to you further is if I actually start to describe what entails each Jungian archetype. And then I'm going to start with the warrior. And the warrior has two sides. The warrior has his shadow side, and then there is the warrior in his or her fullness. And by the way, I want to explain that in my opinion, Jungian archetypes can be applied to men and women. Although men and women tend to be swayed towards some archetypes more than others. Both men and women can both, in fact, be in line with each and every one of these archetypes. So it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter what gender you are. It just matters, and it's good to understand that men tend to be more prone towards the kind of warrior aspect and perhaps the magician, and women tend to be more oriented towards the lover, and maybe I'm not so sure about magician aspect. And the king slash queen could be either one. So let's see. I actually see the king queen archetype in females more often, in my opinion. So let's break it down. So what is the warrior? The warrior archetype, from what I understand, there are two domains of being in which the warrior archetype can survive in. Two main ones, at least. And there's the warrior in his fullness, and then there's the warrior in his shadow form. Now, the warrior is basically the archetype of an individual who is basically slaying it in the world. You know, he's working, or she's working their asses off to attain what they need to attain in order to meld into society, or in order to change the world, or in order to achieve a certain goal that absolutely must be met in his or her mind. And this is an absolutely important archetype that any individual in their lives should go through. If they don't go through this phase, then they're going to be run over. Everyone in the world is just going to run over who they are because they never learned how to be assertive. And so basically, a good example of the warrior archetype would be an entrepreneur who's trying to start their business, and they're working like 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, getting very little sleep, just kind of like killing it. Or it could be like a student in grad school that is, that got very little time on their hands, and they're working day in, day out, and they're studying day in and day out, and all they have time for is the hustle, and they like it, man, they like it. Or sometimes they don't, but typically the people who are completely ingrained, who completely associate themselves with the warrior archetype, tend to be workaholics, and they tend to like it. Now, there's the shadow side. There's the shadow side of what the warrior can be. And the shadow side is basically when the warrior loses control, and when the warrior goes too far off the deep end. And this can happen. This can happen to anyone, and it absolutely happened to me. So I know this only through experience. And what can happen is that you can be so involved in self-improvement and so involved in bettering yourself and accomplishing goals and accomplishing this and accomplishing that you can forget about others. And that can be a very bad thing. In fact, you can start to become detrimental to others. In fact, you can begin to lose empathy within your life. And the moment you begin to lose empathy is the moment you begin to lose people. Because it matters what you think about other people, because if you don't care for other people, then you're going to treat them badly, whether it's consciously or unconsciously. And it might be unconsciously. You might just be unconsciously treating people badly and you don't even know it, because you feel as if people don't matter. And so your subconscious mind is expressing that in your everyday speech, whether you like to realize it or not. And so, for example, if you're in full shadow warrior mode and you have a family, this is one of the worst kind of scenarios. If you're in full warrior mode and it's if you were a warrior in his or her shadow form and you have a family, you are basically going to run them over. You are going to ignore them. You are not going to make the time to raise your son or your daughter, or to love your wife. You are not going to do any of the things that entail balance. And this is very, very destructive. It's a very, very destructive thing. And you can run lots of people away from your lives, and you do not want to do it. So we need to understand that the warrior archetype is an archetype that every individual should be going through, but be wary of the shadow form of the warrior archetype. And so that's the symbolic the warrior is the symbolic representation for the workaholic, basically. And then there's the warrior in his fullness. And the warrior in his fullness is basically an individual who doesn't let his work get the best of him. Even though he's killing it in the world, he doesn't forget about others. He does it not for himself, but he does it for his family, and he does it for all of those around him. And he's not being completely selfish. Although everyone has selfish motives to an extent. That's just the way in which human beings function. We are inherently selfish. But to do everything from complete selfishness and to not understand that altruism is an absolutely important trait in your life, that is a mistake. So a warrior in his fullness is an altruistic warrior, a warrior who cares about others, who has empathy for others, but is still killing it and slaying it in the world. So not only is he benefiting himself, but he's benefiting others while he's slaying. So that's the domain of the warrior. Now, I want to go on to the, I'll go on to the magician. And this is a phase that I'm also quite familiar with. It's the phase that I think that between the magician and the warrior, I'm most familiar as far as subjective experience. I'm most familiar with these two archetypes. And I'll tell you why. It's because I am the magician is basically the individual who is a research fanatic. He loves wisdom. It's an individual who wants to learn anything and everything that they can get their hands on, man. And that is important to understand. And everyone, of course, everyone should go through every one of these phases. But there is one archetype that reigns over all, that entails balance, and we're going to get to that one in just a few moments. So a magician in his fullness is an individual who, is very wise, is very kind, is very giving, is very, is an individual who is not completely introverted and shied away from the world, unlike his or her shadow form, which is an individual who basically shields themselves from the world completely. And the only thing that they do, and they've shielded themselves from people and communities, and nobody cares about them, and that individual does not care about anyone else. So once again, it's a form of selfishness. They only care about them, and their entire life is collapsing around them, and they don't care. They only care about learning what's on the internet or learning what's in their next book, while ignoring all the bad issues around them. And eventually it will catch up to them and kick them in the ass. And this is very important to understand, because it can happen to any one of us. It can happen to any one of us, and it almost happened to me. You can get so entangled within knowledge, and you can get so entangled within wanting to learn things that you forget about personal responsibility, and you forget about you and your inherent need, not inherent need, but you and your, let's say, obligations to contribute to a society and contribute to other people and make other people's lives a blessing. And so the magician in his shadow form is that kind of individual who tends to just stay in his room and do nothing all day but research things, and everything in the whole world could be falling apart around him, and he could even be harming others in the process because he's maybe not supporting his family, just like the shadow form of the warrior, although it's a different kind of harm, because it's a different form of obsession. And we don't want that. We don't want the shadow form of the magician. A magician in his fullness is an individual, and I'm repeating this again just to get it in your head. A magician in his fullness is an individual who is wise but makes balance for the rest of his life. So the magician is the symbolic representation of what it means to be a wise individual. Okay. So there's the third archetype, which I'm trying to get more and more familiar with. And I did have a phase in my life where I was a lover, but this is the shortest phase that I've ever been in. And it was only for about a year, maybe 2 years or so. And most individuals who are my age haven't gone through these 4 archetypes quite yet. But when you are on the path to self-discovery and self-realization at all times, you tend to go through phases, and you should constantly be changing. Change is life. Growth is life, guys. If you're not constantly changing your ideas and your mindsets and coming to realizations that you were wrong about specific things, then you are doing something wrong. You have to be willing to realize that you don't know anything, and you don't know anything. And when you realize that, then your domain of being will change over time. And this is important to realize. So if you haven't gone through the phases that I've described thus far, then you might want to keep listening, because these are phases that you need to be going through, and you should be going through. Okay, so the third archetype that I want to talk about is the lover, and this is the one that I have the least amount of experience with, most likely. And the lover is basically, the lover in his fullness, or her fullness, is an individual who loves caring about others and gives to the world and is selfless, is very altruistic, but doesn't forget to take care of themselves. And so, for example, another example of a lover in the fullness would be a mother or a father who is raising a child, and they go out of their way to make sure that they are not overprotected in any kind of way, because what many parents don't tend to understand, and the only reason I know this is because I've been listening to a lot from a clinical psychologist from the University of Toronto named Jordan B. Peterson, and he's a clinical psychologist. He's got a PhD, and he's extremely intelligent. So I'm going based upon what he's saying, is that when you don't expose your kids to nasty things, that's treacherous and that's dangerous. And so the lover in his or her fullness, for example, when they're raising kids, makes sure that they love them, and they love them not unconditionally, but they love them to the point where they love them to the point where they're taking care of them whilst also making sure that the children take care of themselves inevitably and eventually. And that's what the lover in the fullness does. But the lover in the shadow form is an individual who is an unconditional lover. And unconditional love is actually, I would say, quite toxic. Unconditional love is actually bad. That's my personal opinion, is that unconditional love is bad. And this can especially be shown if you are a lover in his or her shadow form, and you are in, and this is a deep, dark example, and you are in a domestic relationship with an individual who is abusing you, but you are in love with them. You are displaying the shadow form of an individual who is unconditionally loving someone who shouldn't be unconditionally loved, and you're harming yourself. and you're harming yourself, and there's a good chance that you might be harming others as well. So you need to ensure that you're not falling into the shadow form of the lover. And then there's another form of the lover that could be entailed as the overly protective mother. The mother that does not, that over shelters their kids. And when the kids grow up, they tend to be high in neuroticism and not high in naiveness. And if a kid grows up to be high in neuroticism, which means has very little resistance to negative emotion, then when something very bad happens to them, because they're so naive, because they're so neurotic, they're not going to learn how to handle it, and they are much more prone to PTSD. And you, as the overly protective mother or father or whatever, you did that. You did that because you didn't give the child enough stimuli in order that entailed getting stronger. And you need to make sure that your kids are stronger. And by the way, guys, these ideas are not mine. These are Robert Moore and Carl Jung's ideas. Now, typically, I don't actually delve into the work of, individuals who are, of psychologists and individuals who aren't extremely modern, because I prefer scientific realms of research. But I've recently found, very, very profound knowledge within sacred and old writings. So, I actually. For example, I'm not a religious individual, but I absolutely adore the Bible. I absolutely adore religion. Like, the amount of value that you can get out of religion, and you can say this even as a non-religious person, it's absolutely tremendous if you were really looking at it from a symbolic point of view. And that's what we're looking at here. These are domains of being that are symbols. They are transcendental figures in which you can strive to be. There are transcendental figures in which you can strive to be to make yourself better. And now we're going to go on to the archetype of the king or queen. And this is the very last archetype, and it is the most important archetype. And certainly, I haven't become the king yet. I'm not at that phase yet. Although, hopefully, it's inevitable. Hopefully, it's a phase in which I experience, because the king is the combination of the other three archetypes in their fullness. So he or she has the work ethic and the strength and the temperament of the warrior, with the wisdom of the magician, and the love and the kindness of the lover. And that's all three of these domains wrapped into one archetype. And basically, you could consider this to be, you could consider the best example of the king archetype in literature that I can possibly think of to be Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was not a wimp. He was a strong man on a mission to die for other people's sins. And so he was taking the heaviest burden that he could possibly bear and bearing it stoically. And that's what Jesus Christ did, and that's why he was a warrior. And he showed no shadow forms of what the warrior archetype entails. And so then there's the magician, and Jesus Christ obviously was an extremely wise man. He would preach to individuals all kinds of knowledge that he considered to be from God. And these were things that changed many people's lives and made them live better. And so that was his gift as a wise man. And so, but he was also a lover. And I think he was probably primarily a lover. Well, he was primarily a king, but I would say more than anything out of the other three archetypes, the balance of those three archetypes, more than anything, he would be on the scale of the lover, because he's an individual who died for the sins of other people. He said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And people don't know what they're doing. People have no idea the bad that they're doing. You just have to be able to understand that. So he was a lover because he was extremely empathetic, but not to the point where he was overly protective. Because he was also a warrior, and he was also a magician. So he was also wise, and he was also extremely mentally strong. And that is the archetype of the king. And that's what we should all strive to be. So, me as an individual, it's like I said, I'm not necessarily religious, but I take lots of value out of religious texts. So, for example, Jesus Christ said to be not God. None of us can be God. But here's what we can be. We can be God-like. We can be God-like, and we can strive more to be Christ-like. And so Christ is like the ultimate transcendental figure of what the king is. And there are other figures and different kinds of mythologies and things of that nature as to what the king could look like. But for the sake of simplicity here, I'm going to use Jesus Christ as a very good example, because he was basically the ultimate, metaphysical presence and essence of an idea and symbol of what it means to be the balance of all of the archetypes, the king. And that is all what we should strive to be: orderly and industrious and creative and loving and extroverted to an extent, and all of these things. So anyways, guys, I actually I thought that some of you might get value out of this, and I didn't realize this, but I was ranting for a good 21 minutes. Good Lord. Yeah, sorry about my hair, by the way, guys. It's actually it's not meant to be in a ponytail right now, but my hair is getting too long, so when it's to the side, it looks kind of weird. So yeah, that's my video on Jungian archetypes. I hope you enjoyed it. So that's it. Peace.